Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today we're joined by Joel Rubinson, the president and founder of Rubinson Partners, a marketing and research consulting firm for a brave new world. Joel is the former Chief Research Officer of the Advertising Research Foundation and is a member of the faculty of NYU Stern School of Business, where he created their first graduate-level business course, Social Media Strategy. Joel was also a baseball pitcher at NYU and is an accomplished blues harmonicist as well. Very fancy. Thanks for joining us on the show, Joel.
My pleasure. Do I need to get the harmonica or no?
If I had my guitar with me, I'd play along as well.
Okay, that's for the follow. That's the sequel.
Okay, sounds good. And did you ever play your harmonica while you were playing baseball? Obviously not out on the field, but
no, those were different phases in my life, actually.
Oh, very cool. So thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So we're going to mix this episode up slightly, a little from the norms, and just get a little bit of background on you and perhaps some of the interesting market research projects you've been involved in lately.
Yeah, so I've been involved in a few very innovative studies, and I was kind of the mad scientist behind these. I've been working as a consultant with the MMA, which is a trade association, one of the few global ones, actually. And we have a number of innovative programs that I help to create. One is called Brand's Performance, and the other is about something called the movable middle. Now, Brand's Performance is understanding how marketers can quantify the value of brand building. So when you see metrics go up in a survey, what does that really mean? What does that mean in terms of an annuity of future sales or conversions or new customers? So that was a very tough question that virtually all marketers wanted an answer to. So I devised a study program that it includes marketing research, but it's beyond marketing research because it's a single source solution where we have a digital ID backbone, and first project managed by TransUnion or Neustar. And they integrated ad serving information with CRM data from the client, who's Ally Financial, which is an online bank in the States, and with survey data. So we had the ability to look at how people responded to the brand in terms of favorability in the survey, and then see what their actual behaviors were and how ad exposure influenced those behaviors. So that's been actually a multi-million-dollar research program, because we've done two of them and we have two more that are planned to learn about that. Another big research program that we're working on relates to something called the movable middle, where we identified mathematically that the right way of thinking about targeting is to segment people not by their attitudes or their demographics, but by their propensity to choose your brand given a category purchase is going to be made. Mm-hmm. And people who have between a 20 to 80% probability of purchase were proven by the initial research to be 5 times more responsive to advertising. Not 5%, but 5 times. Mm-hmm. And now that we've done 10 case studies, we've actually seen in actual data up to 23 times more responsive. So the movable middle is really a big deal. Now, it comes from research in that, I put constant sum questions to get at this, to flag who's in the movable middle. I'll put constant sum questions into like a brand tracker kind of a survey. So it comes from research. But the thing that's transformational about it is that it's not just about measuring advertising effectiveness. It's about using research to cause more effectiveness to happen. And I feel that that's really a transformation in the contribution that marketing research can make to the enterprise. So without going into more, I thought that would be a good starting point for us in our conversation today to think about how you can cause better success to happen.
Yeah, they both sound like really good vehicles. Correct me if I'm wrong as well. For when you're doing primary research with your own customer base.
The primary research would, in the case of like the first study that I discussed, what we did was in the U.S. there's a company called Dynata, which has a large survey panel that is onboarded. So they have LiveRamp IDs, they have Experian IDs, and they're onboarded to Newstar, TransUnion. TransUnion bought Newstar, so I might use those names interchangeably.
Sure.
So they were onboarded. So what that meant was in that study, we were able to identify a backbone of 600,000 IDs that were known to Newstar, and they were also Dynata panelists. So we knew that we could survey them, we could see ad serving to them, we had profiling information on them. So that was how we formed that study. So it wasn't working just with the client and getting their first party list. The starting point was Newstar, but also the IDs that the client sent over in their CRM, like here's new IDs of new customers we got. They were also known to Newstar, basically because the backbone is so complete. So It was really fully integrated data. Yeah.
Okay, so if we just take up the that first project that you mentioned, what's happened in the history of business of market research that's brought you to the point where something like that approach is needed?
Okay, really, really good question. So the first thing is it's motivated by the marketing question that has not really been very well answered. The second thing is, I think the digital data and the ability to match data sets in privacy protected ways, that there's a whole data infrastructure that exists now that really didn't exist, 20, 30 years ago. So that level of sophistication enabled us to imagine a study design like this. And the other thing about it, by the way, that I should mention, is because the ID backbone for Newstar was persistent, advertising was served during a 2.5-month campaign period. People were interviewed as they got served advertising or designated for a control cell during that period. But then we extended for another 6 months after the campaign was over to continue to track passively their behaviors. So if somebody converted 5 months later after seeing the advertising, we captured that, and that became part of our data set. So I don't know that excuse me, I don't know if this really could have been done, 5-10 years ago. So taking advantage of new capabilities to answer this very important question.
I mean, data quality has been something that's come up almost every podcast that I've done over the last 2 years, fraudulent responses, etc. And it sounds like you may have cracked the backbone, as you said, of that through this method.
Interesting you should say that. A friend of mine, who shall remain nameless in marketing research, told me that he works at a company that has their own backbone. And he told me when he took survey panelists and he matched them to their internal backbone, and then they did a review of the quality of the responses and whether or not they thought it was fraud or whatever, the rate of good surveys was much higher among surveys that were taken from panelists who matched to their backbone. So I think that matching process might also be a data quality benefit.
No, for sure. Interesting. And then if we think about that second project that you were working on as well, How about that in terms of what's led to you needing to take that kind of approach?
Oh, that was really an idea that I had that had been cooking in me for years, that the probability that somebody had to buy a brand, obviously it affects their likelihood of purchase, but my thought was it might also affect their responsiveness to advertising over and above their baseline probability of purchase. So I wanted to examine that question. Was there a mathematical linkage that we could infer and prove between someone's baseline probability of purchase and how they respond to advertising? So we started with that. I got other people interested in it. We brought in academics to review the methodology. We had academics from Oxford and UCLA review the methodology. So we knew it was pretty bulletproof. And so we started with a simulation with an agent-based modeling approach, but where we knew we were reflecting, a lot of reality elements of how people get exposed to media, and the distribution of probabilities of choosing a brand given its market share, which happens to follow something called the beta distribution. And so we had a lot of intelligence embedded in the agent-based modeling. Then when we started to play with it, we started to see that it was the people in the middle of the curve, those who had a 40, 50, 60% probability of choosing the brand, that seemed to have the biggest movement in their purchase probability in response to the same tranche of media. So that was the hypothesis I had started with, but I hadn't really thought it all the way through until we went through this rigorous, agent-based modeling process. And again, this was also with Newstar. We used their backbone, and I had their data science resources were working with me at implementing these ideas and formulas that I had been speccing out. But the data science guy, who was the lead guy there, he was no lightweight. He was formerly a nuclear physics professor at UCLA himself. So yeah, we had a really good team working on this. And so that's where it started from, was wanting to explore this. And it was really pursuant to the idea that broad reach marketing might be a really dumb thing to do in an era of addressable marketing. So, which we kind of proved was the case.
So I'm glad you brought that up then, because I'm assuming the next step after such a project like this is how do you understand or pick up those buying signals, so that intent data when someone's in that movable middle? Have you extended out that far, or is it a different project for someone else?
Yeah, no. Well, in the U.S., and I always mention in the U.S. because that's sort of the research is that I do, but also I know that the data availability can be very different from market to market. So, I just want to kind of, give a disclaimer that what I'm discussing has to do with the data availability and ecosystem in the U.S.
Sure.
In some countries, it might be consistent. In other countries, the resources are a little bit less. I understand that. But in the U.S., you have massive frequent shopper databases. It's kind of like the dunnhumby stuff, but on steroids, because that was always like one retailer. So in the US, you have integration, of different retailers' data brought together into backbones of 100 million or more shopper IDs. So when you have frequent shopper data, you can go back over 12 months of purchasing and you can look at their actual share of wallet, towards one brand of their category purchases, and you can flag them that way. Now, in the US, you also have location data. So if you're in the CPG business, you should definitely be using frequent shopper data. because that not only allows you to classify people, but allows you to do it at scale, where they can then create a list of, say, movable middles, who might only be 15% of the US, but you could create a list of whatever, 15, 20 million IDs, and then you can syndicate it for ad serving. So that's a very powerful thing. But that's for CPG. Now, if you're a retailer, such as any retail store, or even a Burger King, or McDonald's QSR, you can use location data, and that kind of data is also available at scale. So that's two industries. Now, there's also in the US credit card consolidation services. And again, I don't know if you have it, but there's a company called Commerce Signals. It's actually was also bought by TransUnion, but there's a company called Commerce Signals, and that's what they do. They integrate credit card information from different credit cards. So it's not just MasterCard, or it's any, or Visa. It's an integration of all of that. Mm-hmm. And it might depend on the category, but they would have brand specific information, again, longitudinally, by ID, for a lot of other sectors. So, you have to find the best data sources possible. But when you can look at purchase histories, and you can see share of wallet by ID for a given brand within a category, then that allows you the best way of classifying if someone's in the movable middle or not, or if they're a heavy buyer or not. If you don't have that, then you can always go to survey-based methods, and then you do lookalike modeling, or onboarding to like smart TV data to see what TV shows are the movable middles watching, things like that.
Yeah, and I mean the shopper data as well. You can have a look at their average, I guess their buying journey as well. Like if they buy a TV now, they commonly buy a TV every 3 years or 4 years. So you can get some of that timing data in there as well, when they're likely to be purchasing next, etc.
Yeah. I mean, so there's that also. So, always start with data assets. But I would say that celebrate the heterogeneity of the marketplace. Don't assume everybody's the same, or everybody's unpredictably, differentiated in the future. They're highly predictably differentiated going forward. And based on that, you should have differentiated marketing strategies and it's not just about sending the right message to the right ID. It's about, being selective in your ad serving. I've actually built an audience optimizer where the optimal levels of spending from one audience to another can be 15x. So in a broad reach plan, you're basically spending about the same amount for every consumer or ID. It's like some average rate of spending, and no particular audience is getting more or less, because you're just trying to get the broadest reach you possibly can. Turns out that's really not optimal. It's not optimal for driving sales, or what's called ROAS, return on ad spend, but it's also not optimal for winning new consumers either. So it's really not optimal, period. But again, what really excites me about this is the whole theme of this is using research and analytics to cause more effectiveness to happen. It's not just about measuring effectiveness, and it's not just about like retrospective readouts on how'd you do last quarter. It's about actually changing marketing in a way that makes it work better. So that's exciting to me.
It is. So yeah, really, really fascinating point, and really like that. So if you were to say what's one significant thing or takeaway from this that you'd like to make today, what do you think that would be?
For me, or for people listening in?
For people listening in.
Yeah, I would say I would say it's really important in your research strategy to realize that insights alone are not enough. That every insight that you're offering has an embedded prediction in it. And what you really should try to do is flesh out what that embedded prediction is, because then you're really directing action, and you're also setting the stage for validating whether the insight was true or not. So for me, insights that aren't accompanied with predictions and indicated actions are kind of empty calories. I know, like brilliant analysis of segmentation data would seem like a really cool thing, and you feel really smart, and everyone, you give your presentation with great slides and everyone says, wow, that was really terrific. I would not be satisfied with that any longer. It might have been earlier in my career I was, but, I think you have to move beyond that.
So when you're talking about predictions, are there kind of a few different types of predictions that you're thinking about, you're talking about when you mention that?
Yeah, well, a prediction could be, like what trajectory is a brand headed on, rather than like from brand tracking, tends to be, at least the brand trackers I've looked at, tend to be retrospective. They tend to be readouts on how you did over the last quarter, how you've been doing over the last year. How have you been trending? But that's how have you been trending in the past. More importantly would be a prediction of where the brand would be headed based upon the dynamics that are in motion. So that's one kind of prediction. The other kind of prediction is like an input-output prediction. If you were to spend more, if you were to spend differently, if you were to change the mix of tactics, if you were to change your targeting, here's how your results would change. That's another prediction. So I mean, there's the other thing about these ideas is that they do lead you to create different worldviews of marketing. So, as soon as you buy into the notion of like movable middles, I mean, even if you're just focused on heaviness of use, but even if you're focused on some notion of people having sustainable patterns in their behavior, and that targeting people who exhibit certain patterns is much better than delivering advertising really broadly, then that would lead you to want to use retail media a lot in your business. So retail media, I'm not sure about where you are, but in the US, it's a big, big thing. Amazon, about, I don't know, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that, decided to get into the ad tech business. So they took their ID backbone. I mean, who doesn't shop at Amazon, right? They took their ID backbone, and then they took all the patterns of not just what people buy, but how they shop, because they know what people are searching for. They know what product pages they're viewing. There's a tremendous amount of information. So by segmenting consumers in that way, they become highly valuable targets. And then Amazon has built out a network. So you can serve advertising either on Amazon.com, or you can syndicate. They would do this, of course, not you, but they would syndicate an audience out to a network of thousands of web publishers to serve the advertising digitally. Now, of course, Amazon also has their own streaming video at this point, so your ability to activate is really unlimited. Now, it's not just Amazon anymore. Walmart did it, Target did it, CVS did it. In fact, the CMO of CVS told me he was going to adopt the movable middle concept into their retail media offerings for product marketers. And then he left and he became the CMO of General Motors. So anyway, so we didn't get to activate that right away. But the point is, I think there's 2 or 3 dozen retailers in the US who've gone into the ad tech business, the advertising business. Now, it makes tremendous sense. Not only is it good for marketers because the ad response should presumably be higher through proper targeting. But the other thing about it is, I mean, unless I'm way off, I think ad tech margins probably have gross margins of 50% or more. You know, I mean, what's the expense in that? Whereas retail margins are notoriously slim. So if you're a retailer who can leverage what you've learned about people into an ad tech business, boy, you can make a lot of profit. And Amazon, by the way, is number 3 in the US at least. Now, I think Alibaba is in the same business in China. I mean, I don't work in that market, but so this is not really just limited to the US. But, you know, just imagine, I mean, I'm not sure what Amazon is up to. It could be $20 billion or more in retail revenues. I mean, in media revenues. I mean, if the profit margin is 50%, they could be making more money on that business, you know? So it's a strong motivation. So anyway, so the prediction could be a strategic directional prediction like that, like, oh boy, you should really be thinking about this emerging opportunity for how to serve advertising. And you'd be fast on the trigger if you did that. So any of those things would be within the realm of prediction, I would say.
And this ultimately comes down to just thinking about what the ultimate outcome that you're hoping for with your insights as well. So having that metric-focused approach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also in terms of metrics, you know, marketing research is, of course, you know, measuring stuff, right? And, you know, you get brand KPIs that marketing research would feed into, or a business intelligence function, which might even encompass more, would want to bring all these signals together. But the signals have to be aligned to an underlying model of what matters. So I think research with proper analytics and modeling of consumer processes and modeling relationships of advertising to growth, understanding all of that will point you to better metrics. And, you know, one example is that from the analytics I've done, I can tell you the most powerful statistic of all, if you're trying to capture one statistic that would tell you if a brand is poised for growth or not, is the repeat rate. Repeat rate, and I mean it really in a specific way, which is estimated, predicted, measured probability that people buy your brand twice in a row or choose your brand twice in a row. That is an extremely powerful measure. It fits into linear algebra tools that can be used for prediction. But if you don't have a repeat rate that's commensurate with your market share, you're going to decline unless you improve that number. And if your repeat rate is growing, your brand must grow. And it will grow in a sustainable way, not a perturbation where it jumps up and then it comes back down again. So just having your eye on the ball of the right kinds of measures is, I guess, is another way in which you can frame out what an organization is that's fully aligned on what it takes for success is doing.
So this could be a little controversial. NPS, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or family? Do you think you're possibly better off to reframe that question as how likely are you to continue using us or purchasing from us again?
Yeah, let's go into business. That's good. I like that. Well, I don't know if that one question is an answer to what marketers need to know by itself, but you're going down the right path. The other thing, so give you a specific example. When I do research on this question, the way I get a repeat rate is I prefer to get it through a constant sum question, where I elicit someone's consideration set, and then I pipe that into a question where they get 10 points to allocate for their next purchase or their next 10 purchases, depending on the category and what makes sense. And then they allocate the points accordingly. Okay. So what you have is you have a data set where every row is a respondent and every column is a brand. And you now have a probability based on how many points out of the 10 they gave to every one of those brands. And if the brand wasn't in consideration set, it gets 0, obviously. Okay, that's a probability of purchase vector. If I have a probability of purchase vector for every respondent in my study, then I can construct a predicted switching matrix from that data. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm multiplying that by its transpose to get a switching matrix. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a matrix of if you have 20 brands. So if you have 5,000 respondents and you have 20 brands, you have a matrix that's 5,000 by 20, right? But what I want is a switching matrix that's 20 by 20. The diagonal terms of the repeat rates, you can get to repeat rates with the division. The off diagonals are the switching probabilities. So that gets you to those repeat rates that I was talking about to get to those diagonals. Now, when you ask a single question like the one that you suggested, it can get you to the same kind of data, but I like to have the richness of all the off diagonal terms, because then I can do linear algebra stuff to that whole matrix, which I've done. So,
Yeah, cool.
But NPS. But going back to NPS, I don't think it's a very good measure. Certainly, it really sucks at being comparable across countries. Anyone who's done NPS who's in a global business knows they can't compare the US to Japan, for example. It's a question that I've never really seen if it's validated or what you're even trying to validate it against. And then you have the issue of you're asking customers of a business a question about how they feel about that business. Well, that's not the world. The world includes non-customers. So if you follow what I'm talking about in terms of, constant sum question, you get non-customers probabilities of choosing you, even if they're not yet customers, which is a really important signal. So I don't know how much usefulness there is for NPS. I have seen it used in a transactional way, like on every transaction, how would you rate your transaction? And then you can get NPS data. Maybe that's a little better in that you're seeing if you pissed off a customer, that might mean something. But other than that, I've never been a big NPS guy.
Okay. So you mentioned before about calorie-poor research. What did you exactly mean about that, and how do you think we got there as an industry?
Well, it has to, first of all, when I think of calorie poor, what I'm really referring to is this notion of not really making a prediction or not trying to anchor it in the real world of behavioral data in some way that that the artful analysis that you did really has meaning in terms of moving the business forward. So, I'll give you an example. I was involved once when I was at Unilever a long time ago, my start of my career. I remember Unilever paid a huge amount of money to its agency to do a laundry detergent segmentation study. So segmenting people in terms of their habits to, I guess it was laundry habits really, but it was a massive segmentation study that they did, and they were presenting the results, and there's this segment and this segment, and everything got profiled out, and the research was beautiful, and people are reading into it, how much sense it made and which segment they personally thought they were in. And so the insights looked, really good. I mean, everybody was really resonating with it. And then I happened to see which brands were indexing high in which segments. And I noticed that brands that were indexing high in the same segment do not, from behavioral data, actually compete much with one another. So there was this lack of behavioral tie-in that meant I felt, you wouldn't be able to use it because it's telling you brands that don't compete with each other for the same segment of consumers. So that's an example of empty calories. Sounds great. The math was good. The artistry behind it, the storytelling was good. No calories. Another example. There was a great article in like 2005, something like that, 2005. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was about this research that was done by an anthropologist where they paid people who liked Starbucks. They gave them a certain amount of money to go to Dunkin' Donuts for 2 weeks. They couldn't go to a Starbucks. And they did the same with people who loved Dunkin' Donuts. You couldn't go to Dunkin' Donuts, you had to go to Starbucks. And one of the quotes that made it into the Wall Street Journal article was somebody from Dunkin' Donuts fan said he felt like having coffee in Starbucks was like having Christmas dinner with people he didn't know. That's how we felt, right? Great, right? I even used it in presentations until I was given a consulting assignment to analyze behavioral switching data on coffee-based QSR occasions. And it turned out that most interaction was between Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. So when you looked at behavior, you saw a completely different pattern. So that anthropology work, I did actually meet the guy who did the research later on, but that anthropology, it was empty calories because the embedded prediction wasn't true. No, the same people do go to both places, So those are just some examples of, you got to flesh out the behavioral prediction. What does it imply? What actions does it imply? If the actions are ambiguous, you're not sure what to do with it. If you're the marketing lead, it's not good. It has to be unambiguous and has to be proven to be right more often than wrong.
And say if your sample was 1,000, and your questionnaires may have been, say, 50 minutes long. That's 50,000 hours or minutes, of time that you've spent on something that doesn't necessarily give you much nutritional value, if you use that terminology. So there's a lot of respect for the respondent that comes from your point as well.
Yeah, well, that's true. There's a lot of artistry or craftsmanship that goes into constructing a survey in a way that will elicit the most meaningful answers from a particular respondent. I've seen work that made a lot of sense to me that, like, for example, if you're doing a new product forecasting survey, like a BASIS type of concept test, that if it's a concept test for a product that's very innovative, you can't use the same wording and the same lead-in as you would for a Me Too product. Because if you present a Me Too product concept idea, a line extension, something like that, people will immediately form an opinion of what it is. Like, they'll understand it. They'll be able to have referent learning. I know what this thing is, and I can respond to it. If it's a completely innovative product, they have to think about it more. So you need to warm them up. You need to have a different lead-in. You might need to have exercises. So there's ways of getting good answers from surveys where you could also get pretty bad answers. And it's important, like in a behavioral economics sense, keep in mind when people go to a store, they make choices, but when people are taking a survey, they're making a choice also. And the same behavioral economics, the same non-compensatory decision making goes into a survey. What answer should I give to this question? Or here's an attribute I never thought of. What should I check off there? So it's part of the craftsmanship of knowing not to do that. By the way, I was talking about new product concept testing. That's another perfect example of empty calories, where at a client who did an attitudinal segmentation study relating to an innovative product that they had, and they created a typing tool, of course, for the different segments. So the product idea was motivated by one particular segment. When we did the concept test and we used the typing tool, turned out the purchase intent was no higher among that segment that motivated the idea than any of the other segments.
Wow.
And so I dug in. I said, where did this come from? Well, it turned out it was something that emerged from a series of qualitative interviews. It wasn't even quantitative research. So, hey, it sounded great, but that was certainly empty calories. How can the segment with the needs that you engineered to not respond more with purchase intent? I mean, it meant that the thing provided no predictive value. So I would get off the bus at that point.
Okay. Are there any key things that we should consider, researchers should consider, to avoid the low calorie research?
Yeah, I would say if you force yourself to think through the implications of the insights that you're about to present, like, what does this mean in terms of predictions about what's going to happen next quarter or over the next year, or what's going to happen if I do this versus do that in terms of marketing? And if you think through all of that, you are able now to set up a way of evaluating if a couple of things. One is you're setting up a way of evaluating if the insights ultimately proved out to be valid or not. Because otherwise, how do you validate an idea from, say, an attitude and usage study or a segmentation study? Basically, it's whether it makes common sense or not. But common sense is not always going to get you to the right answer. Some answers are counterintuitive in truth. So that's the first thing, is try and think it through all the way to what implications are. And the other thing is, if you think it through to actions that you're indicating someone would take. Some actions are reasonable and other actions are not. I mean, you could never expect a marketing organization to not engage in certain actions. So you do have to kind of anchor it in the reality of what the business could or could not do. So I just say, think all that stuff through. And then also the final thing is, you're not really in the business of just artful analysis and presenting good research back. You're in the business of creating growth. I once asked the head of research at Unilever, in the Americas anyway, she was the head of research, and I said, what business are you in? I thought she would say something broader than research, but she might say analytics or whatever. And she said to me, I sell soap. Research is how I do it. Thought that was great.
Yeah.
So that's what you do. You sell soap. So find a way to sell more soap with what it is that you're doing. And if you're not selling more soap, then the calories are empty. Empty calories.
So taking a more commercial approach, or thinking anyway, particularly from the outset, from the start of your projects.
Yeah. And also you will be more prominent in the organization as the person who thinks that way. And you'll be the person that the marketing leads want to go to, because you're giving them guidance on the decisions that they're facing. You're not just giving them insights. I mean, you have to connect with people, and it's got to be It's ultimately it has to ladder up into the different decisions that people can make, the different levers that they're able to pull, and you're directing them to some levers rather than others. Like when I was the head of research at the ARF, that was right at the time that, you know, you had a lot of DVRs that were emerging, and you didn't quite have streaming yet, but you had technology that was threatening TV. Okay. Threatening the linear TV business. And I spoke with the head of research at CBS, and I spoke with the head of research at ESPN, and it was interesting to hear their role in helping to guide the organization as to whether or not they should be worried about DVRs. Like, how worried should they be, and what should they do about it? That's an example of, you know, of providing input that affects the core of the enterprise. That's what you should be trying to do, is get to a level like that.
No, sure. So I guess that's a really good segue into what advice would you give chief insights officers on how to, I guess, maximize their ROI, ensuring what you've been outlining today ladders up through to strategy and direction, etc.?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is you have to embrace the new. You have to be ahead of the new. So you need to be the source of knowledge in uncertain times for marketing and brand and corporate leadership. So one of the things I've noticed, you know, maybe going back 10 years or more, was that I think research was slow to embrace digital, the whole digital world. And that means that with marketing's toughest questions, they're not turning to you, they're turning to someone else. You want to be the person that they turn to. So whatever those toughest questions are, you know, you want to be ahead of that. You want to be the email that gets responded to, you know, right away in that stack of emails. And you want to provide thoughts before the question is asked. Like in the work I started out by telling you about, no one asked me about Brandon's performance. That was my idea. You know, I proposed that to the CEO of the MMA, and he said, "Wow, do you really think that's a big idea?" I said, "Well, let's ask the board." And the board is like a who's who of marketing from all across the ecosystem, right? So he puts it on a board agenda, and everybody's, yeah, that we are all grappling with that. I mean, so, and that's how you know you've energized people around an issue. Same with the movable middle. You know, no one asked me that question. I offered that. Now, the reason why that's important is every insights person should be taking the lead role at suggesting things the organization should be worried about or should be seizing on as opportunities before those questions are raised of you. You should be ahead of the curve. So I would like to see that.
So that just gives us a really nice touching point on something that we believe quite firmly in, and it's just trying to give market researchers space to think. So in order to do what you're suggesting, you need to have time to sit down, to let your curiosity run wild, to analyze your business and organization. You can't do that kind of thing when you're flat out wall to wall.
That's a really good point. And in fact, I had a consulting assignment with one brought in by one marketing research director, actually was at a publisher, a media company, where he wanted me to evaluate how well his marketing research department was functioning within the organization. And that was the only thing that came up as a shortfall, was that everybody said, you know what, I am in meetings from 9 to 5. I can't even think until after 5 o'clock. So nobody was really doing much about thinking about the future. That was my main finding for them. So that's a really good catch, you know, on your part. And so, yeah, you need to have some breathing room Now, not everybody can do this, right? So you have to figure out like who's going to be your think tank. And the think tank could be a little bit of an extended team with consultants, Oh, I think I just raised some business ideas for myself. But anyway, no, but seriously, but you need a think tank. And I would say, listen, it's not just a think tank about business issues. You really need to be on top of analytics. You need to be on top of emerging analysis tools, emerging data tools, all that stuff, because you have to actually practice your craft in a best in class way. So you can't be falling behind on that either. So like what's the contribution of AI to what you're doing? Of course, everybody must be thinking about AI, but some people are probably more imaginative about how it's being applied than others, and you need to embrace all of that stuff to make you really as progressive as lean forward as you possibly can be collectively in the team. Now, someone's got to do blocking and tackling, so it's not like everybody in a 40-person department is thinking grand thoughts, right? Yeah. But collectively, the collective competence of the team has to be that you are thinking that way, and you do have data science resources within your team, and you do have somebody, whatever you can envision, they can do it in Python or R or whatever tools they're using. Personally, I suck at coding, by the way, but I found out ChatGPT is really good at it. So I'll use it to, explore a particular statistical concept and then figure out how I would generate a database or do an analysis. And I happen to prefer R, but in R or whatever. And then I'll bring it to ChatGPT and it'll write code. And if I get an error message, it debugs it for me. Nice. So, there's really no limitations in this day and age. And so I would be doing all of that. I guess one other idea that just struck me is I saw a brilliant idea by somebody that said, people have personal tutors. Students have personal tutors do better. Now, of course, who can afford a personal tutor? Well, the answer is now everybody can, because ChatGPT really becomes like a personal tutor. So Khan Academy, this was like a TED Talk by Sal Khan, who runs Khan Academy, which is a freely available, brilliant set of videos and everything. They have built an instance of a large language model that is oriented to being a tutor. And anybody can have access to it. So it's no longer gated by economic, capability or whatever. That's brilliant. So I just happened to think, well, couldn't you do that within a research department? Couldn't you create your own knowledge base accessible via a large language model that would make everyone in your organization, right from the start as you bring them in, just that have the knowledge of the world at their hands as as filtered through your view of the world, and including internal, proprietary IP and knowledge. So I would be thinking about any and all of that,
Very cool. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how that all rolls out using a mix of large and local language models, tertiary, primary data, etc., in a safe environment, obviously. But yes, some good tools that I guess are on hand and will be available for insights officers and researchers.
It's really, it's simple to use. I did it. I've written a lot of blogs, right? Yeah. So what I did was I downloaded all my blogs into one giant PDF. And then I found a tool that allows you to build a large language model off of your own documents. And then I tested it. I said, how well does this thing really work? It worked really well, actually. It also showed me blind spots in what I've been writing about, because in some cases, there were certain legitimate marketing questions that it didn't have an answer for, meaning I had never written about it. But it works well. and speaking with marketers, a lot of marketers have already created their own, behind their own firewall, their own large language models. So, so their own proprietary data and their own, internal documents and everything is now accessible to their own employees. They're using generative AI to optimize, images and media that's seen by particular individuals based on context and what's known about them. And I've seen big lift, by the way, for that generative, AI approach to creative. So it's a brave new world out there. And the MMA ran this great conference in Miami last year. They're going to do it every year. It had like 3,000 people. They had celebrities. And LL Cool J, the rapper, but he's also a business person, right? He was speaking at the event, and someone asked him about AI, and whether it was a risk and should we stop using it, and was it so on and so forth. And he said, that's kind of like standing under Niagara Falls and saying, wait, let me explain. Right? So which is a great line. So, that's the point. You have to embrace this stuff. It's coming, whether you want it or expect it, or, and you want to be ahead of it,
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, we've covered some really fascinating topics today, and I really appreciate your input and your thoughts, expertise. Any final points you wanted to leave, or a final takeaway, Joel?
So I wasn't expecting that question. What would be my final thing? I don't know. All I could tell you is how I kind of look at the world, which I think has served me pretty well, which is I see the multidimensionality of problems. So for example, when I think of a brand, you can think of a brand in terms of its market share and its sales performance. You can think of a brand in terms of its underlying consumer dynamics. You can think of a brand in terms of the attribute ratings you'd get from a tracker survey. And there's a tremendous strength by connecting those different views of the same object. And through the connection process, you will come up with ideas and tools and approaches to cracking the code on marketing success that otherwise would not have been evident. So I'd say, connect in all these different dimensions of the problem you're studying, and if you think you have an answer, it's got to work in every one of those dimensions. And if it doesn't, you haven't really gotten the right answer yet.
Great.
Did that make any sense? What I just did that? Did it did.
I mean,
getting past my Brooklyn accent. Did that make any sense?
No, absolutely, and that's the whole part of a market researcher's role, isn't it? You've got to take data, which is just everything, a blur, a big mess, and it's getting bigger and bigger every day, every minute. And then reducing that down, reducting it, distilling it to something that can be easily comprehended and perceived. So, wise words.
It's a messy world. It's a messy world. So, you have to tackle it, but don't lose all the mess of it either, because sometimes it's the mess of the world that really governs how consumers are, what they're grappling with, So, so that you kind of have to straddle that fine line of data reduction with seeing the messiness and how you can help consumers navigate through it, and that'll endear them to you.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Joel.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
It was. And thank you to the listeners out there as well. If you have enjoyed what you've listened to today, feel free to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, or even share this episode as well with someone that you might know would find it interesting too. I've really enjoyed the chat, and Joel did as well, as he said. So thank you, and thank you for listening to Now That's Significant.